Whether it's criminal defense, family law, or civil liberties, in and out of the courtroom, I'm Christina Allbright. I'll fight for you. Give me a call, 707-672-5958.
My name is David Boyd, and I'm a member of the Occupy Civil Liberties Working Group. And on behalf of the working group and all of our co-sponsoring organizations, I want to thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy life for making some time for us to discuss important issues this afternoon. The Occupy Civil Liberties Working Group is made up primarily of folks that were involved in the Occupy movement one way or another, things that were happening on the national landscape in terms of our civil liberties and economic justice and greed and corruption brought us together. But we really formed as a group because of concern of how those kind of national forces and global forces were focusing here in Humboldt County and some troubling directions that looked like we might be going. So we've been working for the last 5 or 6 weeks to organize today's event, and it took a village to pull this off, and I would just like to ask all of the members of the Occupy working group who worked so hard on this just to raise their hands or stand up so people can see who was involved in this event. Today's program will be kind of in two main parts with some interludes. The first half will be some important information sharing to help us get all up to speed on the current realities facing our First Amendment rights and civil liberties, both nationally and here in Humboldt County. We'll have a brief transition with some music, and then we'll move into breakout sessions where people will have more opportunity to talk with each other and come up with some action ideas for how we can continue to move to help preserve our rights here in Humboldt County. I'd like to now introduce a local poet, Jerry Martien, who's going to provide some inspirational words for us. Jerry?
Thank you, David. I want to begin with something it's still in progress, like this process we're in today. Inspired by a lifelong resistance worker, Tina Strobos, who recently passed away. During World War II, she and her family worked to hide Jews and others in their houses from the Nazis. When she came to America, she continued this work, I think most recently taking in refugees from Hurricane Katrina. You can see the link there, I think, in this poem called Refuge. When I was a child, the Jews of Europe were in hiding, as were gypsies, communists, queers, dissidents, anyone who didn't behave like a good fascist. A few brave people gave them shelter, hid them in forests, in sewers, outhouses, or secret rooms in their houses. A man with a toolbox would show up at the door saying, "I'm a carpenter from the underground. Show me your house, and I'll build a hiding place, a concealed door, a place of refuge, and a way to escape." When I was older, I became a carpenter, worked on the houses of the underground, the holders of resolutely different ideas, people of indeterminate ancestry, doubtful loyalty to the state, lacking visible means of support. But it was after the war. The doors by which we came and went no longer had to be concealed. The job was easy. But the fascists hadn't really gone. They came with new uniforms, new promises of security. They came in the night, said they were preventing terror. They came in the morning, saying they owned our houses. They came at all hours. Evacuate, they said. The levee, the reactor, the social plan has failed. They watched us, questioned us, put us away, paid concrete workers and lawyers to build rooms with no way out. Now I'm too old to carpenter, work with words instead of lumber. The houses I work in are mostly windows. Transparency is our last and only refuge. No hidden doors, no secret rooms. This house means just what it says. Even a fascist can understand it. The foundations and walls are a few old words, amendments to those words. Come in, they say. You must be from the underground. You step inside, the place is bigger than it looks. Your work is off in one corner, but you see there are rooms for everyone. The Wiyot, the Chinese, the Wobblies, the people on the street, anyone deprived of life or liberty or livelihood because they threatened that perfect union of business and police that is the essence of fascism. There's room in here for the entire city of Eureka, the Humboldt County government, the courthouse steps, the grass they built a fence around, the signs on the fence, the people against the fence. There's a lot to do. You set down your tools, make your plan, get to work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Next, I would like to introduce our introductory speaker and panel moderator, Dan Faulk. Dan is an instructor of politics at Humboldt State University and had been the host of the Corporate Crime Report on KMUD radio for about 7 years, some time back. Dan, come up and join us, please.
Thanks. George Orwell, in his book 1984, stated that the means of conquest will become ever more subtle and sophisticated. And I was thinking about that when I was thinking about the difference between the boot stomping on the face of humanity that he described in his book, sort of what happened to Fred Hampton in Chicago when the FBI labeled him and the Black Panther Party the #1 threat to the domestic security of the United States. And then, after 9/11, sort of the manipulative process of creating a law called the Patriot Act, which made it very difficult for anyone to vote against it or be opposed to it in the time of threat. And then, of course, the modern time of seduction, when technology is narrowing our range of thought with text messages which almost prevent our capacity to conceive of alternatives. So it was a warning he wrote after fascism, after the very poem that Jerry talked about, after fascism was in Europe, that the future was going to be different. And when they asked me to do a introduction to this, I was thinking of how I would do that in the briefest possible time frame, and I thought maybe there were a couple of reference points I could make to events. Because I think oftentimes when you're part of an empire, when you have a blue passport, when you can fly out of Eureka International Airport and end up in Mumbai, that you sometimes don't realize that you're part of an empire until you realize that the people in India cannot come here as easily as you can go there. And once you understand that you are a part of an empire, that you are a citizen of an empire, that you can travel anywhere in the world, then maybe it's important to look at what that empire is doing in the rest of the world, and how they may be doing it subtly, and how they may be doing it seductively. And so I was thinking that one reference point to begin this discussion was what John Perkins in Confessions of an Economic Hitman calls the corpocracy, the way in which the system invades third world countries and instead of colonialism with external coercive force, seduces people through projects into going into permanent debt, which only benefits a small, thin layer of the elite in that country and impoverishes everybody else. And so we look at that model of seduction and how it's been applied to the third world and how it creates dependency and impoverishment with these massive infrastructure projects. And then we think about The Big Short by Michael Lewis and how he describes the exact same process when it comes home to the United States. And we offer the United States, we offer subprime mortgages, which put people in debt with the illusion that they can buy a McMansion with a liar loan, which ends up being sold into a CDO with credit default swaps, which only line the pockets of this tiny 0.01% of, executives at Goldman Sachs with money. Well, people go into debt, go into bankruptcy, go into foreclosure, and as the Occupy movement has pointed out, become homeless. And when the people attack the Occupy movement, they're attacking from fear, for they know that they too have the fear of falling into poverty, into bankruptcy, into homelessness. And so this unification between the homeless, the possibility of where we could go if these economic policies continue, where these economic policies have taken the third world, where these economic policies that only line the pockets of the elite could take us, are a warning of why resistance is necessary, why we need those courageous people to stand up now at this time to this system that is becoming ever more subtle and sophisticated in its conquest of the American people. So that's, that was sort of, I was asked to present sort of a broader picture, and then I wanted to bring it back a little closer to crony capitalism and disaster capitalism, because the capitalist system has destroyed the economy of the United States and destroyed the economy of the world. And Naomi Klein, a Canadian with an outside perspective, warned us that crony capitalism, disaster capitalism, it would use every disaster, natural and artificial, economic and political, to steal the common, to take away the commonwealth. If you think about the word commonwealth, you think about state parks, you think about universities, you think about schools, you think about roads. You look at the deteriorating infrastructure, the privatization of these resources. These are the common. We are commoners. We benefit from the common, and they want to steal the common from us. They want to take our commonwealth and turn it into their wealth. They want to do to us what they've done to the third world when they've stolen their resources, what they do to the poor when they foreclose. They want to do that to every single thing this country has created. Disaster capitalism is the move of conquest by the elite to steal. They're thieves, and OWS is standing up to that. And they're using federal power to take away from us what is ours. Now, the OWS movement is an American movement, but I'd say this OWS movement in California is a California movement. And why I say it's a California movement is because California, from the second Constitution, when the Working Men's Party stood up against the railroad monopolies, demanded accountability for corporations. When the progressive movement and Hiram Johnson ran for governor of California, he proposed that the people of California use direct democracy to fight back, against the corporate overlords that own the political system. And he proposed the initiative, the referendum, and the recall to give us the power against the Board of Supervisors who might pass an initiative against our civil rights and liberties to recall those people. That was a power that Hiram Johnson and the progressives advocated to fight specifically corporate power. And California has extended this struggle against corporate power over time. Proposition 103, we passed it in California. We said that insurance companies trying to rip us off, we demanded regulation. Proposition 65, when you go into a store like Target and it says right underneath the plates, this product contains a cancer-causing ingredient, it's there because the people of California said, we want to know what's in our food, we want to know what's in our products, we don't want corporations to poison us without our knowledge. The people stood up, they fought back. That's democracy in action. That is the power of the people to fight against corporate rule. And we know Monsanto does not want us to have that power. And finally, California has this incredible legacy recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is that California has a uniquely democratic political culture. Now, the federal Constitution, the Bill of Rights, says the government cannot interfere with our right to free speech. But in California, the California Constitution says we have an affirmative right to exercise free speech. It's different. It's not preventing the government. It's almost like what comes directly out of the Declaration of Independence. When it says, in the face of oppression, in the face of our oppression, our obligation is not to say, well, somebody should defend our rights, or that we have the right to defend our rights. But the very foundation of this country is based upon an affirmative obligation. What does it say? It says, in the face of oppression, I'll read it to you because it's an important line. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they're accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right. It is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. That is what Occupy Wall Street is about. It is about our democratic duty in the face of tyranny to resist oppression, to defend liberty, to provide sanctuary for those who are being beaten and tyrannized by the system. If anyone listens to KMUD, especially during camp season, they know about the Civil Liberties Monitoring Project, the effort to defend us from violations of our Bill of Rights in Humboldt County. And it's a unique project, and John has been with that project for years. His commitment to civil liberties has gone on for a long time. But what most impressed me when he sent me a little bio was the fact that he started a high school. And he started a high school to sort of create an alternative where students could learn about their rights instead of about what their wrongs were. And that high school, John told me, is still in existence. So not only is he fighting for civil liberties in Humboldt County, but he also laid the foundation for students to learn their civil liberties and fight for those in the future. John.
Yes, I'm John Hockett from the Civil Liberties Monitoring Project. And I'm really happy to see all of you here today. I think we all have the same concerns. Our rights are being eroded, violated. I was a founding member of Civil Liberties Monitoring Project back in 1983. A group of citizens in southern Humboldt were concerned about the erosion of civil liberties even back at that time. We got together in a park and said, what can we do about this? Had a round discussion, spent the day, came up with the idea of starting the Civil Liberties Monitoring Project. Little did I know or think at that time that it would even still be going on to this day. We were just addressing immediate concerns. Instead of the issues kind of going away and getting smaller, over the years, the issues seem to grow. We would document, monitor, advocate, and educate the public on various civil rights, civil liberties, environmental issues. We do this through meetings, public forums, public meetings, candidates forums, newsletters, KMUD reports, updates and bulletins that we have. And there's a KMUD hour once a month. Through that work, and actually the amount of, we receive calls from the public out of concerns and address those calls. We advocate for all types of issues, from juvenile, homeless veterans, veterans' rights, just a wide variety of civil liberties issues. And as we proceeded with this project, the issues grew and grew. Yearly we would have a public forum, pick 4 or 5 subjects, get a panel of speakers and present this to the public and on the radio. I noticed in approximately 1992 that it was getting overwhelming. There was a lot of attacks on the First Amendment, basically on the Bill of Rights. The calls we would get were so overwhelming, our staff at times couldn't handle all of them, and we concentrated in just the Humboldt, Trinity, Mendocino County area. Really, the erosion of civil rights started before 9/11. I was looking back at some of our forums, and there was a clear message that civil liberties, First Amendment rights were being restricted, under attack, even in the 1990s. But after 9/11, everything started. People weren't speaking out. The government put fear in people to where they're afraid to stand up for their rights. It's like we need to limit our civil rights because it's the war on terror. A poll back in 2001, right after 9/11, 50% of the people said we need to limit the amount of civil rights people have in the First Amendment rights. We need to protect ourselves from the war on terror. And this is the fear the government put in the public. They've gone so far as to say that people that speak out on the war on terror are terrorists themselves. And that seems to be, they actually go in and tell local law enforcement. Homeland Security will inform law enforcement. You know, if there's protesters out there speaking out against the government, they are very likely to be terrorists. Civil liberties work, we've worked on candidates issues and trying to get better access for the public to the Board of Supervisors meeting, to the Planning Commission meetings. Southern Humboldt feels disenfranchised, and it's such a distance to come. Just like this forum, for someone to come, it's 70 miles, the price of gas, $5 a gallon. There's a lot of people that wanted to come, they couldn't. Maybe a few of you carpooled and made arrangements. But access to the process in Humboldt County is very difficult for everyone in the rural areas, both in northern and southern Humboldt County. Civil Liberties Monitoring Project is trying to get access to the Board of Supervisors via like some type of internet link so people can testify and give their statements to the Board of Supervisors on all these important issues. That's in the works. The Board of Supervisors tends to put things off. They tend to do things kind of backdoor, just as this ordinance, this very important matter that's going to affect all of us in the future for any issues we would like to present, or any type of assembly, free speech. This forum was in progress, and the Board of Supervisors came up with the idea we need an emergency ordinance. We need it now. People went to the Board of Supervisors last Tuesday, and one of the supervisors held up a document and goes, "See, we don't have anything on it. We have no ordinance. We're just thinking about it. It's going to be down the road sometime." On a Sunday night, I checked the Time Standard, and it's like, though the Board of Supervisors has the this emergency ordinance written up, and then they're going to vote on it Tuesday. Well, the ordinance was 5 pages. The attachments were 170 pages of documents. So it would take you an hour to download them off your computer to even to get them. I believe they tried to circumvent even this forum and have this ordinance ready to go before the people can speak out. As to the courthouse, it's a historic public forum. There's not many public places in Humboldt County where you can get your message and convey it to people. Everyone goes in and out of the courthouse. It's where the county seats, so people, you know, the supervisors, the planning commission, that's the best way for people to get their message across. I mean, the community, people don't have millions of dollars like corporations and wealthy people to advertise and get their message out. It's like free speech really isn't free anymore. It's the people getting the message out, or people, corporations that have millions and millions of dollars. And the only real free speech is for people to petition the government to be able to assemble at a public building and convey their concerns and ideas to our officials. And as to our officials, they've ignored the problems. They're trying now to paint Occupy as this, you know, homeless people, mentally ill people. Well, over the years, I've heard promises in many meetings I've gone to the Board of Supervisors that they're going to address these issues. They're going to have a place for the homeless. They're going to have more housing. They're going to have a camp. They're going to address veterans' issues, the disabled, disadvantaged. But they haven't done it, and the problem is growing. There's probably 4% of Humboldt County that's homeless, houseless, however you want to put it. They're from all walks of life. Many of them do have health and mental issues, are disabled, but they're not being addressed. Now the Board of Supervisors is basically trying to shut down the public forum that has been going on ever since I can remember. People, oh, I have some concerns, let's go up to the courthouse and we'll address the Board of Supervisors. Now they're trying to take this away, and they're trying to limit the time. This ordinance would only allow any protesting from, they would shut it down at 6 o'clock and you couldn't be there until 9 in the morning. There's so many issues, you know, you could go on with civil liberties. We have a hotline. We get probably 60 to 70 calls for assistance a month. And we advocate for these people. There's a lot of people that don't have a voice. So we try to speak up to them, for them. And we feel we're being shut down. We feel the rural areas aren't being allowed access to the process. And the First Amendment is, I mean, it was only to the federal government, then it was 14th Amendment added those rights to the state. I mean, the First Amendment at least affects all our other issues and rights. It was the First Amendment was a foundation, and over time we've developed other rights through that right of free speech and petition. African Americans being allowed to vote, women being allowed to vote, Civil Rights Movement, the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, all of those probably wouldn't have even occurred if there wasn't a First Amendment. And other countries, that even democracies, don't have a First Amendment in the same sense that we have. And so it's the government's duty to protect it, but they're not doing it. And it's really our duty to speak up and protect it. I mean, I would hope that 500 people would show up at the courthouse and speak up and protest this ordinance and assert our rights and say the public want access to the process. There's much more I could say, but you know, we each have 10 minutes, and you could go on about the First Amendment's significance for some time.
Of course, we know that the corporate media has become increasingly concentrated in a few hands. And there are only a few voices out there, and we're incredibly lucky in Humboldt County to have KMUD, which is community-based radio, but also to have a progressive AM radio station, KGOE. And our next speaker, Tom Sebourn, is the manager of KGOE. He keeps the progressive voice on the air in Humboldt County. And I also want to point out that, you know, this movement, Occupy Wall Street, is a movement that incorporates a wide variety of people. Tom himself sort of symbolizes that. He's had 3 of his own independent businesses. He's a small business person. He's an entrepreneur. He's creative. In fact, he is what we're told the future will require for survival is being adaptable and flexible to change.
Whether it's criminal defense, family law, or civil liberties, in and out of the courtroom, I'm Christina Allbright. I'll fight for you. Give me a call, 707-672-5958.
And right now we're very lucky in Humboldt County to have Tom running KGOE. Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, I was asked to fill in for Marcy Burstener, who was unable to make it, and that's too bad because she would definitely, I think she's the best person to speak on this subject, but thought I'd give it a try. So I'm going to use some other people's words. We're going to kind of go through a quick history of free speech in this country, starting with some writings from Teresa Willingham, who was a journalism professor who was writing to her students in 2008 about the history of freedom of speech in America. And she says it started with the first settlers whose desire to experience religious freedoms necessitated the right to freely speak their beliefs. So the constitutional basis for freedom of speech, however, can be traced directly to 1735, before our country was even founded, to John Peter Zenger, a German immigrant who worked as a colonial newspaper publisher. Zenger's newspaper, the Weekly Journal, became the center of attention when he published articles critical of the governor of New York at that time, who was William Cosby. When Cosby was unsuccessful in silencing Zenger, first through threats of libel and then by more violent threats of burning his press, Cosby leveled sedition charges against him. Now, not everybody knows what that word is. They don't throw it around so much these days, but in law, sedition is overt conduct such as speech and organization that is deemed by the legal authority to tend towards insurrection against the established order, or what we do a lot. Anyway, kind of why we're here. Zenger was arrested. He was tried in July 29th of 1735. He was acquitted, and because of that, the value of free speech in America was firmly entrenched. In 1776, the year our country was founded, the Virginia Declaration of Rights articulated some of the first formal calls for citizens' rights, declaring, among other things, that the freedom of the press is one of the greatest bulwarks of liberty and can never be restrained by despotic governments. It was by despotic governments. It was largely the work of plantation owner George Mason, who ultimately served as a model for bills of rights in other states, in state constitutions, as well as the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. In an interesting twist, Mason, along with Patrick Henry and several others, opposed the Declaration's ratification in the Virginia Convention in 1788. So even then, when they thought they wanted this stuff, they would oppose it. There were reasons they didn't want to give everybody free speech rights. Back then, it was most of the rights were granted to just white males and landowners. So we have come a long way, but things are slipping away. James Madison and freedom of speech. It says that Madison's original draft of the Bill of Rights contained 2 proposed amendments dealing with the freedom of speech. One said, the people shall not be deprived or abridged of their right to speak, to write, or to publish their sentiments, and the freedom of the press, one of the greatest bulwarks of liberty, shall be inviolable. The other one stated that no state shall violate the equal rights of conscience or of the press. Though Madison called that amendment the most valuable amendment on the whole list, Congress did not agree and continued to take a dim and seditious view of anyone expressing critical views of the government. Some things never change. The Sedition Act of 1798 was created in an effort to keep Thomas Jefferson's party from defeating the Federalists in the 1800 election. It punished anyone found guilty of writing about the government, their writings about the government that were considered false, scandalous, or malicious, subjective criteria by any measure, of course. Jefferson won despite the measure, and the Sedition Act expired by its own terms in 1801 without ever actually being tested by the Supreme Court. The act did, however, touch off a lively debate again on free speech issues and prompted both Madison and Jefferson to write discourses on freedom of speech in the press and to author resolutions against the act. In fact, when Jefferson became president in 1801, he pardoned everyone that was convicted under the Sedition Act and helped pay their fines. From colonial settlers speaking their minds on faith to John Peter Zenger's outspoken press to provocative debates ignited by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, free speech continues to be among the most contested of American rights today. Now we enter into the Postal Service and how that relates to the press and free speech. At age 24, Benjamin Franklin took over a bankrupt newspaper from his boss. He made some changes and started printing what was called the Pennsylvania Gazette. PBS says that the Postal Service in the United States was greatly influenced by Benjamin Franklin, who was appointed Postmaster General of Philadelphia in 1737, which is just 2 years after John Zenger's trial, Joint Postmaster General of the Colonies for the Crown in 1753, and Postmaster for the United Colonies in 1775. Though Franklin, through his efforts, the length of time for mail service between major cities and the colonies was cut in half. As Postmaster of Philadelphia, Franklin was able to increase the circulation of his Pennsylvania Gazette newspaper, as the position allowed him easily to deliver newspapers via the city's postal service. And the previous Postmaster of Philadelphia was also a publisher and a competitor of Franklin, so they were both using the postal service to move around their newspapers to share information. Craig Whiteford, whose writings can be seen at historybuff.com, wrote on the subject, "Since the beginning of our U.S. postal system, the delivery of newspapers and periodicals was treated as an important function of the mails. Congress felt that an informed public was essential to a strong democracy, and for this reason, newspapers and periodicals have always enjoyed preferential postage rates in comparison to letters." Prior to the issuance of special stamps in 1865 for the sole use of newspapers and periodicals, all rates were collect. So the postage being paid upon delivery, which is really cumbersome and didn't work out so well, and left the post offices with a large number of undelivered papers, which were never called for, and a lot of paperwork that nobody wanted to do. Today, the U.S. Postal Service is under a serious attack. According to southernstudies.org, in 2006, Congress passed a postal reform law that, among other things, requires the United States Postal Service, a self-funded agency that receives no taxpayer money, to prepay 75 years' worth of retiree health benefits within just 10 years. The mandate, which no other federal agency under it all, no other federal agency is under, cost the USPS $5.5 billion a year that they have to stick away for future retirements for the next 75 years, and accounts for all of the Postal Service's $20 billion in losses over the past 4 years. So this mandate was stuck on them by Congress. Basically, many political pundits think it's to destroy the union there, which is probably one of the strongest unions left in this country. In that time, USPS actually made a net profit over $600 million sorting and delivering the mail, but it ended up in the red after it was forced to deposit those billions from its operating budget into the retiree health fund. As a result, 120,000 postal workers are now facing the threats of layoffs, and mail processing centers are targeted for closure, even in this town. There are also plans to eliminate Saturday mail service, which would hit residential and rural areas especially hard. Recently, President Obama joined those who endorsed dropping Saturday service. So this could happen at any time. On top of this, most of our media, as Mr. Faulk said, that we get our information from is owned by just 6 corporations. Those are GE, News Corp, which is the parent company of Fox News, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Those 6 companies control 90% of what we watch, read, and listen to in this country. Newspapers across the country have been bought by investment groups and profits squeezed out of them to the point that many have laid off much of their staff and some have even gone bankrupt. Even the almost daily local paper here, the Times Standard in Eureka, emerged from bankruptcy a couple of years ago, and now is 89% of their stock is owned by lenders led by Bank of America. So our local paper is owned by lenders, investment bankers, and P of A. This media consolidation is affecting the information our country as a whole is influenced by. Due to deteriorating conditions in the news business, many of the best and brightest journalists are no longer in the business, which is how I got in. Hey, in a country where we all need to be well informed in order to make good decisions in the voting booth, we have to have access to real information. Restricting postal service will affect small town newspaper delivery and media consolidation, which means fewer and fewer independent voices challenging our government and the status quo. With the Supreme Court affirming that money equals free speech, those with the most money will have the most free speech. The only way for those of us without lots of money to answer and bring balance to that free speech is to organize, stand together, demand that those rights we still have be left and upheld and exercised and celebrated. So we all need to speak up while we can, stand up for our rights, and share as much information as we can with others. This is why we're here today, and we hope to gather and share some information and come up with some solutions. I don't have the solutions yet, but that's why we're all here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So just a little sidelight in history. People are talking about the Bill of Rights today. And sometimes, I'm sure, in the Occupy movement, people feel like they're in an existential struggle against overwhelming forces. But I want to point out that those Federalists who passed the Alien and Sedition Act to lock up the supporters of Thomas Jefferson, those are the people that wrote the Constitution. Those are the people that were opposed to the Bill of Rights. And the reason we have a Bill of Rights is because the people that opposed the Founding Fathers, they were called the Anti-Federalist. And they said they would not vote for the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. They fought for a Bill of Rights. They thought they'd lost the struggle, but they finally, in New York, organized and won that battle. So we can thank the dissidents, the opponents, the Anti-Federalists for giving us a Bill of Rights. And that gratitude's important because we need to remember, even when we appear to be losing, we may be winning if we stick with the struggle. The next person I wanted to introduce, and he stepped in at the very last minute, Peter Martien. And Peter is a local attorney. His practice actually focuses upon civil rights. He is on the American Civil Liberties Union Board of Directors. And I just found out he's the treasurer of the American Civil Liberties Union local chapter. It's always good to have people that control money on our side instead of the other side. Peter.
Thank you, Dan. Do you mind if I use that podium? Well, I feel like I'm among friends here. It's good to see all of you. I'm Peter Martien. I've been a lawyer in this town since 1990. I have a general practice, but my first love is civil liberties. This current stint that I am doing on the ACLU board is actually my second stint. The first one was aborted prematurely. It was back in the 1990s. At that time, I was a prosecutor and I was working for Terry Farmer. I joined the ACLU board because I believed in civil liberties. I was a good liberal. I was from Berkeley. And Terry Farmer called me in one day and said, your position on the ACLU board is inconsistent with your duties as a prosecutor, and you must resign or you're going to lose your job. And that experience, and I did resign because I had a mortgage and 2 little kids at the time. But that experience was a formative experience, let's say, because since I've left the county and been in private practice, one of the things I love to do is to sue employers who abridge the First Amendment rights of their employees. And I've done that successfully on several occasions. So I come to this civil liberties business from early on. My grandfather was Egon Zeitlin. He was a Jew and a Marxist and a professor of economics in Berlin. He was born in 1901. When my father was 6 years old, the family had to flee Nazi Germany, spent most of the war in Palestine. My father came here as a young man. So from early on, I knew the importance of civil liberties. And so I'd like to talk about a couple of cases that I'm working on, and I did get permission from my clients who are involved in those 2 cases to do so, since there is the attorney-client privilege, and I can't speak about cases without their permission, but 2 of them did give me permission to discuss. And the first one I want to talk about that we're currently fighting is the case of Richard Saltzman versus the city of Arcata. Richard Saltzman brought a taxpayer suit against the city because the city passed a panhandling ordinance that basically outlawed panhandling in the entire downtown commons of the city of Arcata. Except they didn't come out and say that because they knew that that was blatantly illegal, so they piecemealed it. So they said, you can't panhandle within 20 feet of an intersection or a store or an ATM or a park. And so when you add up all those prohibitions, there is nowhere in the city of Arcata to panhandle. Now, there were two parts to this ordinance. One was aggressive panhandling, which is basically panhandling plus being an asshole. We didn't object to that. And there was a list of asshole things that you could do to be an aggressive panhandler. But we did object to ordinary panhandling. And Richard Saltzman particularly objected to that because the ordinance as written would have prevented somebody from standing holding a sign asking for money. And Richard dramatized that by standing next to a guy who was, one of those pizza guys, standing out in front of a pizza shop with a sign saying, discount pizza. Well, Richard stood right next to him with a sign that said, it's illegal for me to hold this sign.
Hurry up and buy me a pizza because I want to get.
Right. So that's sort of the absurdity of this law that we are challenging. It's set for trial in a couple months, and we're hoping to prevail in that case. And what's particularly annoying to me about that case is that begging is a constitutionally protected activity, and the parks and streets of the city have from time immemorial been considered public forums. And so we want to take that space back for the people, and we hope to do that. So the second case I want to talk to you about is that's got me steamed up. It's not actually a case yet, but it involves the city of Eureka. And the city of Eureka, about, I believe it was in 2008, started, I don't know if they started it then, but it came to the ACLU's attention back in 2008 that the city of Eureka was permitting sectarian prayers to open their council meetings. And so we at the ACLU sent a polite letter saying this is illegal, you might want to not do that. And I thought that was the end of it until I missed the last ACLU board meeting, but I learned from my fellow board members that on March 6th and March 20th, the city of Eureka has now decided to bring in lay ministers to invoke the name of Jesus and Yahweh in opening their meetings. And I believe that to be blatantly illegal. And I think it's particularly ironic that there are 3 or 4 former law enforcement officers on that city council who don't seem to get the message that that is illegal and it will not be tolerated. So there is a plaintiff, or I expect there will be a plaintiff, and I've talked to a couple of people about it who are steamed up about it as I am. And we're hoping to bring that action forth and to compel the Eureka City Council to obey the law. How much time do I have? 2.5 minutes. Okay. All right, I want to talk a little bit about, just in general, civil rights laws. One thing that people don't tend to know about civil rights litigation is just because the right is in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that you can sue and get money damages. In California, in a horrible decision that was made in 2002 by the California Supreme Court. The case is called Degrassi versus Cook, and basically what that case says is that most of the California Constitution is off limits for claims for money damages. So if somebody violates your constitutional rights in California, you can't sue just based on the constitutional provision that says that they're not supposed to do that. You have to sue under a different law. You might be able to sue for injunctive relief, which means that you can get them to stop, but you can't sue for money damages. And so that is a big disincentive for people. We need to make a living, and litigation is difficult and expensive, and it's time-consuming. So when you can't sue for money damages, that is a big disincentive to bringing an action under the California Constitution. You can sue under the Tom Bain Civil Rights Act, but in order to sue under that act, you have to prove that the violation of your rights was accompanied by threats, intimidation, or coercion. And if you don't prove that, then you're out of luck as far as the California Constitution is concerned. There are also a lot of immunities that come into play when you're suing the government, and it's the government that is the one that usually is involved in violating your civil rights. One of the immunities that I find particularly reprehensible is Government Code Section 818, which says that if a government employee lies to you, orally or even in writing, if they put a lie in writing, you can't sue them for money damages. So they're basically, in California, local and state government are immune from lying to the citizens. You can't sue them for money if they lie to you, which I just don't understand, but that's the law. And then there's federal law, and there's the federal civil rights statute, which is we call a 1983 action. And that statute does allow for money damages. It also contains a lot of judicially created immunities. That statute was originally passed around the Civil War era to restore rights to freed slaves. And it's been limited, well, I think for years you couldn't sue at all, but these days you can sue on it, but you are stuck with some of these immunities. If a right is not well established, then you can't sue. So I am out of time. I just want to say it's been a pleasure to be here and see all of you working to change what really does need to be changed. And as Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Thank you.
The next person I want to introduce, most of us know if we walk down the street who this person is, because whether it's an environmental issue, homeless issue, or an issue of very people that Peter talked about now are on the Eureka City Council, that's law enforcement. This is the person who has been working to hold those in power accountable for their actions, who has insisted that those with coercive power have a responsibility to defend the civil liberties and the civil rights of the citizens who grant them that power to maintain order. And more than anybody else I know in this community, Verbena has struggled long and hard. Sometimes I think it's amazing the risks she takes putting her face on the streets to do what she does, but she's done it. So most of you know Verbena, CopWatch, People's Project, homeless advocate, community organizer.
All power to the people. All power to the people. And you stand up, stretch it out. It's all power to the people. All power to the people. Yeah, it takes all of us. So my name is Verbena, and I want to first remember that we are on stolen Wiyot territory. And something that Dan reminded me of is one thing I just saw again in my thing of quotes, but it was from Dorothy Day, and I'm probably not saying it exactly right, but she said, I believe our future depends on the poor. And the other thing that I always think is that if houseless people and poor housed people aligned, that would be the most powerful alliance we could have in this country, in this world. So, but I wanted to talk, first I guess I'll tell you about the two projects I work on most every day of my life, and that's Redwood Curtain CopWatch, and I work at People's Action for Rights and Community. PARC, we call it PARC. It's a physical space. It's in Eureka. It's an office, an organizing, a meeting space. It has an info shop, which means it has a book lending library, lots of literature. It's a resource center with computer and phone and space to just get off the street or have a conversation with someone, eat some food. We spend a lot of time there documenting abuse by the state and other entities that have seem to have the impunity to abuse people, whether that's landlords or whatever. And we do a lot of court support for people. So it's a lot of CopWatch type work. In 1997, in this area, although there had been an Arcata CopWatch for a few years, Tad and some people on the plaza in Arcata, I don't know if people remember that. But in 1997, we began Redwood Curtain CopWatch, and it comes from a history of the Black Panther Party, Klan Watch, and in this area there was a group called COG, which was Citizens Observer Group in southern Humboldt. So that's part of the sort of heritage of CopWatch. And Redwood Curtain CopWatch films police activity on the streets and make sure to encourage a culture of CopWatch where we're all present. We pay attention when we see police or other agents. We've dealt with ICE, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, other kinds of government agents encountering people, whether you know the people they're encountering, whether you care for the person they're encountering, whether you think that person did something wrong. We encourage people to stop and watch and listen until the encounter is over, so that whoever it is that's in so-called authority knows that we care about how they're treating people. And so we do that, and then we encourage everyone to do that. We also pass out and know your rights information. We do know your rights workshops of all different kinds, whether it has to do with protests or just general living. We try to put the truth out of what we learn from witnesses and people who are usually silenced about their experiences. We try to put literature out on the web, out on the streets, and on paper. We have a website, redwoodcurtaincopwatch.net, and we have a hotline where we answer the phone all the time, or people can leave really long messages if they're watching something happen. We also try to support. A lot of our work is supporting people who are victims of abuse or survivors. Maybe someone in their family was killed by the police or by the mental health system or the jail. And so I thought about this today, and I decided to tell you about a process and years of work related to one situation, which is the death of Martin Freddie, as his family calls him, Cotton, Martin Cotton. Have people heard of him? Yes. And he's the second. His dad's Marty Cotton, who I've become quite close to. And the work that we've been doing needs to continue related to his death. Freddie, or Martin, I'll call him Martin since that's how most people hear about him, but he was living on the streets in Arcata and Eureka and was fatally beat by many Eureka police officers on October 9th, 2007, and he was left to die by the Eureka police and the Humboldt County sheriffs in the Humboldt County jail or correctional facility, where Occupy Eureka has been for like 168 days in front of that jail. The reason I want to talk about this particular situation is to share with you the many roles and various types of community work involved with dealing in civil liberties violations and fighting for justice. The work is what kind of work is already going on and needs to continue and needs more participation. Civil rights work is, I believe, all of our responsibility. It's not specialized, for instance, it's not just for attorneys. It's something we all can and must engage in. So during the work around Martin Cotton's death, we were also still maintaining we were still researching other situations and supporting families. There had been a lot of killings by the Eureka police at that time, and there was the daily abuse of people on the street and in their homes and the usual targets of the state. And so we were still working on all of that. But after we learned about the beating and the death of Martin Cotton in front of the Eureka Rescue Mission, which is problematic for many people, just so everyone knows, we analyzed what we were reading in the media, and you can, once you start to know what really happens compared to what's written in the Slime Slandered or even the North Coast Journal or any of that, then you start to see the same phrases that mean that the police are lying about what they did. And so we were analyzing that a little, but immediately we created Know Your Rights literature for the 40-plus witnesses that were all sitting outside the Eureka Rescue Mission, many of whom are already traumatized veterans. They're already traumatized from the street. They're traumatized from the Eureka Rescue Mission. And so we wanted people to know that they have a right to tell their story to whom they are comfortable telling it to and when they are comfortable telling it, because we expected a bunch of suits to be out talking to all these witnesses that saw this beating. And that didn't actually happen, but that was our first concern, was that people knew that they didn't, because we know when someone speaks about a situation like the police beating someone to death, that the suits and the mainstream media are going to twist and pervert their words in favor of the police. So we wanted them to know that they didn't have to answer the questions, which none of us have to do when an officer or any government agent asks us or starts talking to us. So we made this specialized Know Your Rights literature, and then we hit the streets, and we spoke with people, we gave them literature, we told them they didn't have to talk to us either. They didn't have to tell us their names if they didn't want to. They could keep it anonymous, but that we were doing this because if in the future, one, we wanted to know what really happened. We wanted to offer support to them, and we wanted to see if we can move towards some justice, although I don't believe there's ever justice when someone is killed.
Whether it's criminal defense, family law, or civil liberties, in and out of the courtroom, I'm Christina Allbright. I'll fight for you. Give me a call, 707-672-5958.
Moving on, we contacted the family, we met with them, we offered emotional support, we gave them advice about the media who was kind of knocking on their door, showing up at weird hours, the coroner showing up at 3 in the morning, things like that. So we organized a protest right away. So we got it out into the public sector and the media. We sent some people to this so-called town hall meeting that the chief of police was holding, and we had them videotape it and speak at that, reflecting what we had heard from real witnesses. And we started to compile the information that we were understanding as the truth. We made literature. We showed up at every event we could. We set up tables on the street. We handed out the literature. We put it on the internet. We just tried to spread the word. We were getting the same story from many, many people, different than what the newspaper was saying, different what the police were saying, different from what the head of the mission was saying, but similar, all the witnesses that we talked to. So we created spaces for the Cotton family and others to gather and talk about their feelings and how they were doing and stuff. And creating safe spaces is really important. There wasn't media at these spaces. There was more people of color. There were people who are often silenced, and we wanted people to feel comfortable talking about and sharing. And that's a really healing thing for people who've been experiencing this kind of abuse. With People Project, we organized an event that we always used to do more in the housed neighborhoods, but we did it in the downtown to support houseless people and and people who had witnessed this is a people project grub and grab where we had food all day and we gave out clothes and different stuff, and we wanted to reclaim public space. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap it up real quick. We spoke at city council meetings, any events that we could. We assisted the family in writing a claim so that they could preserve their right to have a lawsuit. They were also facing, the Cottons were facing foreclosure, like many others at that time, and it was a traumatic time, so we raised about $6,500 in a week so that they didn't have to leave their house after their son was killed. We compiled the records and we sent them to lawyers. I borrowed a car, went to the Bay Area, talked to lots of lawyers. We had Know Your Rights workshops and people project meetings, organized protests. Every year, August 9th is Cotton Day. We've made videos to put out on YouTube and all this stuff to keep these things in people's minds. We'll try and go faster because I know my time is up. Oh, thanks. And we did support at the trial, and we actually sent the media a lot of what the testimony that 2 days ago the newspaper said, new information from the judge about what really happened at the Cotton. Well, they had that information during the trial, but no newspaper up here wanted to cover what really was being said by the cops, by everybody in that trial. So we were trying to spread that information at least to the people. We still need to keep the pressure on about that situation, about a lot of others that are not publicized. And so there's a lot of work that we invite you to join us if you want to join with Redwood Curtain CopWatch to do it, or just get some tips on what's going on or how to, and do it yourself. All of that is encouraged, but it's something that all of us can do. You don't have to have specialized training or anything like that. You just have to care. And so the last thing that I want to say, Tracy says you can have some of my time, but the last thing that I want to say is that CopWatch also keeps up with the laws and the other kinds of abuses that happen all over the country. And we stay in touch with lots of state violence groups and all that. And so we have known, kind of like John was alluding to, of these laws that are clearly violating people's rights against activists and things like that. For example, the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which essentially says if you interfere with anything agricultural, i.e. logging, or genetic engineered crops or anything like that, or animal torture chambers, that you get a terrorist enhancement on any charge you have federally. And so a lot of people who consider themselves progressive have ignored those things, have ignored them and said, well, I didn't agree with those tactics and I don't, that doesn't relate to me and all this stuff. And now it all comes around, because when we do that, it eventually hits us. And now it's coming to basic things like whether we can hold a sign in front of the courthouse. So we really need to keep that solidarity. All power to the people. And please, let's keep working on this and not just come to one forum and go back like everything's normal, but keep this work in your heart all the time in your life. Thanks.
So much of what Verbena does reminded me of what sort of links between Jerry's poem, Peter's life story, what John is trying to do. And I was thinking she was talking about Reverend Niemöller and how Jerry was talking about rescuing victims of fascism and Nazis in Germany, and how Reverend Niemöller said, it's so easy for us to ignore the other that is not us. But if we don't stand up, when they come for us, there's no one there to speak. And I think that what Verbena does is courageous, outspoken effort that those of us who appear to be moderate, respectable members of the community like me don't always see, what the connection is, and yet there's such a powerful and profound connection. The other thing I was thinking about when she was talking about this case was there's a new book out, and it's amazing that it's a new book. It's still in hardcover, I think, but it's called The Assassination of Fred Hampton. And if you go back to the assassination of Fred Hampton and you read what the police said about the hail of bullets coming from the Black Panther Party and the way in which the media presented that story, and the way in which the police lied, and the judges covered up the story, and then you hear about this case. It's an amazing parallel, and you think things have changed, and then you go back to 1969 and you read what happened then and what's happening now, and you realize without people like Verbena, without people like CopWatch, those things continue, and they threaten all our lives and all our liberties and all our freedom, even for people like me who are white, male, and incredibly conservative. Now, with that in mind, the next speaker, thank you for coming, Tracy Rain, is an attorney who has a long history of fighting as a homeless advocate for those people who've been classified by our society, I think, is the unaesthetic, unappealing, well, I don't know, maybe there's unpeople. And Tracy has fought for these people's rights for years as an attorney, and she is a specialist on homeless legal issues. And as those foreclosures start to come down from that incredibly responsible institution known as Bank of America and Citicorp and Chase, and we're talking about a cascade of foreclosures happening all over, there are middle-class people that are going to become homeless, and their families are going to become homeless. And it's people like Tracy who are fighting for those people.
Thank you.
Tracy.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. I hardly consider myself a specialist, and it sure would be nice to win some of these legal battles more frequently than we do. So I came to talk about, essentially about legal camping bans in general. Arcata and Eureka municipalities each have a ban on camping, and so does the county of Humboldt. And a lot of these Occupy arrests, what we've noticed is that folks are getting arrested not for protesting, of course, and not for being on public property, but for camping, and the one they like a lot is resisting arrest. And those are just totally bogus charges for what's going on in front of the courthouse right now. I typically, on behalf of criminal defendants, I typically bring a pretrial motion challenging the constitutionality of whatever camping ban exists. And I'm aware that this challenge probably would go over a lot better in a civil venue, but I just haven't maneuvered myself into that position, for better or worse, at this point. I have brought a motion in front of 3 separate judges in Humboldt County arguing that a ban on camping, especially as applied to folks who are involuntarily homeless, is cruel and unusual punishment and violates the U.S. Constitution, the California Constitution, and therefore should not be enforced by the cops. And it's a good argument, but it's limited by a Supreme Court case called Tobe, it's probably actually Tobe, T-O-B-E, which examined a Santa Ana camping ban and determined that that particular California camping ban would not allow that group of folks to be classified as a group, as houseless people. And really, as houseless advocates, that is the Supreme Court case that we've been fighting since, I believe, 1999. I also argue that the whichever statute it is, and I've argued it as to the Eureka Municipal Code and the Arcata Municipal Code, and I look forward to arguing it as to the county code, as to 2 cases that I carry right now. I argue also that that code section violates our fundamental rights to travel, and that actually applies to folks, not only folks who are involuntarily homeless, but to all of us, and that matters whether or not you're houseless, and especially if you are housed and standing up for this movement, which does advocate fiercely for also for houseless people. It doesn't seem fair that there would be a constitutional argument as applied to houseless folks in situations like this, where we are all, hopefully all of us, sleeping on the street together, standing up for the same rights. And I also, constitutionally, I also argue that the camping ban is overbroad, vague and overbroad. when those arguments don't work in criminal court, I then bring a necessity defense at trial, and that basically allows me to argue that, yes, the person did violate the statute, but did so in order to prevent a greater significant evil. My houseless advocate friends, Tad and Verbena, taught me how to win this defense. And then a very nice gentleman from the Public Defender's Office also helped me learn this. And anytime I have any houseless client who is charged with any camping violation or anything that looks like a camping violation, I will argue the necessity defense. And what I find ironic is that for a long time, houseless advocates had to bring evidence in front of the trial court that person not having any place to sleep was a greater significant evil than sleeping in public, violating that statute. There's now a Supreme Court case that has a specific affirmative finding that folks, as a physiological need, must sleep. So that certainly is helpful legally. And really, those are legal bases that I bring in criminal matters. I don't consider myself a specialist in either criminal court or in homeless matters. But I lived in a Volkswagen bus for 2 years of law school, and for about 6 months of that time period, I felt like I lived in a palace because I also had a motorhome. And I slept through incidents when the cops beat on the motorhome to try to get us parked legally, not bothering anybody, don't know of any complaint ever made, fiercely afraid that they were going to break in and hurt me or, God forbid, do any of the things that Verbena was talking about happen to Freddie Cotton. And I don't know if these are the strongest ways. I'm certainly willing to take input. I think we need to gather as a community to learn what is being done and what can be done. And related to the Occupy and otherwise, if you hear of anybody who is charged with a camping ban violation, I'm interested in at least hearing the story and do compile evidence as much as I can about these types of issues.
Thanks, Tracy. Once again, I feel fortunate that there's somebody out there, taking on these issues. I don't know where they have the money or the time to do it, but it's incredible. We wanted to conclude the panel presentations before we take questions and comments with a person who has been working at the local level directly in occupation. And that's James Decker. He's a person who's tried to bring all those international issues, and we're talking about an Occupy movement that is around the globe now, the national issues that in some ways started in New York, right here to Humboldt County, and James has been working as a Occupy organizer for some time. James.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone that spoke before me for sort of painting the big picture, and I think I'm going to be probably the small picture guy. As my comrade Mr. Orange is fond of saying, what's really going on, Eureka? The police and the sheriff. The First Amendment is needed to protect those sentiments. Pitching a tent on the lawn of the courthouse and saying, I'm not going home until you clean up this open sewer that you call a government. That's what needs the freedom of assembly to protect it. It is the tough things that we need to protect, not the things that we all agree upon. And that is the purpose of the First Amendment. 6 months ago, when a few people gathered in New York and took a park to occupy common territory to retrieve the commons for public use, they struck a chord with a huge segment of the population, and millions of people around the world have followed their example. The freedom to assemble and redress grievances with the government should have protected the New York people. And when on October 7th, we gathered to take up the call of the 99% in front of the Humboldt County Courthouse, it should have protected us. The fact is that you don't know what your rights are until you test them. We took ours out for a spin and found that we don't really have any rights here in Eureka. At some point, there'll be some pictures up behind me showing what we aspired to achieve, what we were trying to create before the tools of oppression came down and took that away. So that's what one of the things I'd like people to actually see, what we wanted to be when they hear the newspaper or people speaking about what we kind of have become, whether that's true or not. This is what we wanted to be. We established a community and began the process of educating the world about the corruption of government and the theft of trillions of dollars by our corporate overlords. Little did we know that while we were inside talking to the Board of Supervisors, trying to arrange for bathroom, a space where we could put a portable John so we could eliminate some of these health and safety concerns, they were smiling and nodding and plotting all the time behind our backs. On November 7th, we found out what rights we really had. The EPD and the county sheriff came down in riot gear with tear gas launchers and rounded up the dissidents and threw them in a cage and stole the property of some, destroyed that of others, and shredded the Constitution in the process. Our tactics morphed as the repression continued. We put forth arguments that tents were speech, and they countered that tents were dangerous, and the tools of oppression came down again. We have, at this point, received some of our property back, most of it destroyed or unusable. No one has been convicted at trial to this point of any crime. Most of the cases have been dismissed or the district attorney has declined to prosecute because we're really not breaking any laws. After rebuilding, they came again on the 14th, and this time they brought a fence. And on the 30th, they came, handcuffed us on the sidewalk, and stole our property. They didn't even have they didn't even put forth the effort to actually take us to jail. After they barred us from the traditional spaces of expressing free speech and protesting here, we used another tactic to educate the public by placing our banners and signs on the fence so they could be read by the passing motorists. What followed was a game of bait and switch with the police. They would come and demand we take down our signs. We would ask them what law they were using to require that action. They would ignore us, steal our signs. They eventually stated a law. We would research it, show them that there was a section in that law exempting political speech, and they would come back with another law. And we would show them the same thing in that law. And time and again, we would continue this process. One of our members even created a sign with the exemption clause from that law, posted it on the fence, and they stole that as well. So far, we've stopped getting arrested for that now through the efforts of people like Pat Kanzler and Hans Oshbacher and many other folks out here that went to jail to show that we had the right to do this. We eventually slowed them up, and for the moment, they are no longer tearing our signs down and arresting us. Although, make no mistake about it, they plan to ordinance us out of existence come Tuesday. And even though all the things outlined in their complaints are already illegal, they're going to pass yet another law. Lots of folks have moved on from the Occupy now, and we're kind of down to a few folks. The police have come and packed up the folks at HSU while they were spring break. 3 o'clock in the morning, of course. They never come in the daytime when there's any chance that they might be observed by the populace. On the 30th, on the 17th of December, we tried again to establish a little cover for our table. And we invited everyone to come and see that we weren't doing anything nefarious, that we weren't going to be hiding bombs in our easy up. And everything was fine until 11 o'clock at night when the press and the populace had gone away. And then they came in the middle of the night, pulled up with about 8 cop cars in a truck. A bunch of armed guys get out of a car, no one says a word, and they confiscate our property and drive off. No arrest, no citing of any crime, just theft. What I'd like it to take away from my story is that this is the way a corrupt system stays in power. They exhaust the resources of the movement until they can call it dirty and offensive and offend the aesthetics of the so-called middle class, and then they come down and crush what is left. On that note, the few folks that are still down there occupying would like to invite anyone who has an interest in the occupation to come and join us. We're going to have a General Assembly Monday at 6 to discuss the future of the Occupy, and we'd like people that are interested in being with us to come down and join that. And thank you for your attention, and thank you for sitting through this.
Oh, where has democracy gone? How could we have failed to foresee our rights curtailed and our justice withdrawn in the name of our security? Oh, where has democracy gone? Transnationals don't give a damn. Their game of greed is their mantra.com. They're the boss of their friend Uncle Sam. Oh, where has our Bill of Rights gone? Corporations are persons today. Religions are suspects, the press are just tools. Assembly rights crumbling away. We've got to wake up now, and this is the hour to bring us all back from the brink. A nation where businesses have all the power means the people's rights go down the sink. Okay.
Enjoy your guys' circle jerk.
So were you told you couldn't let your children play?
Yeah, gave me a ticket to boot. I don't know what. I've